Wow, King Josiah had this dilemma. And he's like, what do I do with this old church building in the back? It's a mess. I mean, people haven't been in this thing for years, like 100 years. These people were living just decadent life. One day, he had enough. And imagine one guy standing up to thousands and saying, not anymore. So Joe puts an ad in Craigslist and he says, if you're interested in doing something bigger than you, show up Monday morning at the old church. 100 show, ready to go. They open the door, the old doors creak. They step inside, and it's a disaster. Inch thick of dust. Things out of place and broken. First thing they say is, where do we start? It's like eating an elephant. Just let's do it. One bite at a time. So they start bringing it all out, lining it up, taking notes. What do we got here? What's broke? What's not broken? What needs attention? What needs cleaning? And all of a sudden, the men and the women of the town come together and they are cleaning it up. In 2 Chronicles, it reads how they came together, and after generations, they came together to celebrate in the temple, invited God back, and made the commitment, the living God is our God, and we will serve him. Things were changed. And you look at folks like you and me even today. This all happened, 600 years before Christ? So here we are, 2,600 years later, and I think about our lives where something occurs and we go, no, not anymore. I'm going to stand for God. And we open up our hearts. And we look inside and it's not pretty, but it's okay. Because like eating an elephant, one bite at a time. And just like Israel, you'd think of making that commitment and going in and not knowing, my fault, Sean, and not knowing better yet, assuming, you might want to bring me down now that I've done that to you, Sean, thank you. Assuming that now that we've gone into the temple and made some changes, that God's blessing would just start pouring down. You ever been there? You ever been in your life where you've made some good decisions, you make tough decisions, and begin sacrificing maybe the first time in a long time? And you say, okay, God, I'm ready. And just the opposite happens. Now we come to Nahum, a familiar book. I'm certain that most of you have chosen your life verse out of Nahum. Everybody has. And we learn this prelude and problem, if you're taking notes. Mentioned originally in Genesis chapter 10 and not mentioned again until Jonah. Remember Jonah? Jonah and Nahum, both minor prophets, had very different approach to a city called Nineveh. Jonah viewed Nineveh and crossed his self-righteous arms and said, I know that the message that I'm supposed to bring is of hope and restoration. Not interested. Those folks deserve God's judgment. So continue to battle with God, and as all often happens, man usually loses that battle as Jonah did. Even at the end, we still don't know if Jonah made the right decisions. We have a new guy. His name's Nahum, and his approach to the wicked city of Nineveh, it's much different. Nineveh. What is Nineveh? Nineveh is an interesting city. It's the capital of the empire of Assyria. Syria is one of several very wicked empires that were going to come down the pike in years later. But you've got to picture this. If you're walking into these huge gates of Nineveh, you have to understand that even in the center of Iraq, the best we could figure is where it is, that this city it had a wall that was 9 miles around. So picture, it'd be similar to Anthem. And in the center sat Daratai. Next to Sweetheart Donuts. It was a great city. The walls were so wide that they actually had chariot races on the top of the wall. Inside the city, the architects created the most complicated water systems. There were parks. There was even recorded a zoo, gardens, and it was beautiful and safe. There was a palace in the middle. 100,000 square feet. When I'm a mega pastor, I'm going to get me one of them. Park my jet in there. Can you imagine? Just imagine this huge city. And you imagine this wickedness. And their hedonistic lifestyle, even going back to Jonah, was, of all the things that I just described, the one thing that everyone knew about them was that they took wickedness to a whole new level. In fact, in my notes, I wrote down it's similar to a modern-day Las Vegas. But in actuality, that would be offensive to Las Vegas. It was that bad. In fact, listen to a couple of these things that they were guilty of. The leaders of the Assyrian Empire in Nineveh, which was the capital, they cut off heads of their enemies, and they literally created pillars. So as you walked into the city, you could see pillars made of skulls. They would take generals who were not doing exactly what they were told to do, and they would literally skin them alive, and they would cover the top of the walls with their skin. At one point, they killed 3,000 captives in one event. So not only do they have a Las Vegas type of lifestyle, it's very much similar to a Nazi approach to living. Wicked. Now Nahum comes on. And by the way, just because Nahum is a minor prophet, if you ever wondered what minor prophet, major, it doesn't mean that they're less important. It just means that they're shorter stories. In fact, in my weekly newsletter, I asked if you'd be willing to read the entire book of Nahum. 3 chapters. It takes 5 minutes. And we should probably do that for the next 3 weeks to make sure that we absorb all the things that the Holy Spirit has for us. And we have the prophet Nahum in chapter 1, verse 1, an oracle concerning Nineveh. So here's a book, here's a dissertation regarding the city of Nineveh. As beautiful as it is, as amazing and as grand as it is, even God earlier says it's the great city. says this is the vision of Nahum. And so you have a list: Hosea, Joel, Amos, Obadiah, Jonah, Micah, Nahum, Habakkuk. Joel, Hosea, Malachi, Zechariah, Zephaniah. Got all these minor prophets in here, and you've got Nahum tucked in the middle. And you will wonder, what's a prophet do? A prophet's an interesting guy. Pretty courageous guy. He's the man, the unfortunate man who gets called by God to go into a city or a people, often the Israelites, and speak truth, which is often exactly opposite of what people want to hear. He's that guy. And he comes around and he says, I speak for God. God told me what to say. He told me what to say to you. And I have news for Nineveh. Something's coming down the pike for Nineveh. And my job is to let them know what that is. And it's not good. And it often isn't. And so you have these 3 chapters that we have today in our English Bible. And there's 2 audiences at the same time. Nahum, first of all, his first message is to Israel. And he says this. He says, you need to understand that the God that you serve, the one that you have now come back to and trusted in, and now look to for your future, it is that God who not only is loving, he's not only patient, but he's one of great power. That's the first message. The second message is the people of Nineveh. And he says, you need to understand that although God is extremely patient and loving, there will be a day this patience runs out because he's also a jealous God. And destruction is on its way. Really, it's hard to say whether this is good news or bad news, right? Because it depends on who you are. I mean, if you're the one who is being oppressed by the Assyrian Empire, you probably look at that and then you say to yourself, well, I must believe it. I mean, if God is the one that's telling you that he is all powerful and someone's trying to convince you of that, it's probably not really good news, because the truth is you're probably in a place where you're not believing it. And it would be like a high school football team meeting on a college campus and trying to beat up on and play a college team. I mean, not like Michigan, that'd be easy, but like a harder team, a team that has some depth in its roster. And so here's this little old Israel who's just so teeny, just a little on the map. Oh, and there's Assyria, huge and grand and mean, with all the money and all the resources. God says, I'm for you. You're my children. You may be facing something today that makes it feel like you are this little, insignificant, helpless on the map. And God's message to you is a message of hope. I know some have taken Nahum and they've tried their best to look into the prophecy and see if this is prophetic news, and trying to figure out whether Nineveh is Russia and the church is Israel. And let me just kind of make this real easy. that's goofy. Nineveh is Nineveh. God is God. Israel is Israel. However, there are some things here to learn about our lives that we could take in, and the biggest one that I see right out of the gate is this, is that when Nahum has this message, it's the same message that we heard in the beginning all the way today. God's always bigger. And our living God is always more powerful. And our enemy is nothing compared to our living God. And some of you, even now, your faith, David and Goliath is one story. But an entire army, city, and empire, are you kidding me? And you sit there and you're facing an empire that seemingly is against you. And the hope that I extend to you is the same hope that I take. It's that God loves you, is for you, and he's capable. That we can leave with. So now we look at this portrait of God. Who is this God? We've got this portrait of Nineveh. We've got this little portrait of Israel. Now the portrait of God is this. First of all, we need to understand in verse 2, it says that he's possessive. He's jealous. Listen to this. The Lord is jealous and avenging God. The Lord is avenging and wrathful. The Lord takes vengeance on his adversaries, and keeps the wrath of his enemies. And some people become suspicious of this word jealous. And let me just put it in terms that we might understand. I've actually had people say, well, that doesn't sound like a really good trait to me, to be jealous. I go, no. Now, pathological jealousy, or morbid jealousy is what it's called in the psychological world. That's another story. That's a guy or a gal who walks around always believing that someone is not being loyal to them, and it's a disorder. And so to superimpose that on the living God of all eternity is kind of silly. So what is it? What is jealousy? Well, jealousy is this. You're married, and in fact, the best analogy that I could think of is you and your wife, you have a couple kids, and they grow up as teenagers, and they head to college, and you go to visit them, and you have bought their car, you have sent them to college, you've put the clothes on their back, you've given them an iPhone, not a 5S, and 7 or an X. You went all out. They've got the iPad, and they've got the notebook computer, and they've got this posh living. Oh, and they have a meal plan. Life is just good. Tuition paid for. And you go to visit on Parents' Weekend, which is about right now, and you go and they say, Mom, Dad, I want you to meet my new family. What? What are you talking about? Oh, yeah. Oh, they love me so much. Oh, what's that? Oh, what? Yeah, they took me to lunch. Okay, what else? Well, not much more, but, well, I needed a screen, like a phone charger, and they gave me one. What? And you leave, and you're scratching your head and going, they view this other family as their new parents. And my question would be, is that a legitimate jealousy that's going on? And I would say if it doesn't look legitimate to you, then you've got the pathological disorder going on. In fact, it gets worse in God's situation with Israel. He's saying, we see him and Israel sees him, and not only is we're finding another God, they're saying, well, we're finding bugs and things. We're worshiping things. So it would be like going to college and finding out that your daughter not only has found different parents, but they're Cocker Spaniels. What? And so when God says, I'm a jealous God, he says, I just want you to understand and realize that I'm your God, and I have carried you, and I have cared for you, and I have loved you, and I've become the one that has made you today who you are. And any kind of allegiance to anyone else it's not about me, God says. It's about you. And all of your thinking is just messed up. And so right out of the gate, we find out that he is a jealous God. He's possessive and wants that close relationship. In fact, second thing, he's also patient. He's slow to anger. Look in verses 3 through 6. I'm going to read a little bit longer than I normally do. It says this, the Lord is slow to anger and great in power. So right out of the gate, we go, he's not only jealous, but he's slow to anger. He's not looking for ways to kind of slap us upside the head. He waits as long as he possibly can because he's slow. But then he also says, but he's also great in power. And the Lord by no means clear the guilty. His way is in whirlwind and storm, and the clouds are the dust of his feet. He rebukes the sea and makes it dry. He dries up all the rivers. Bashan, Carmel wither. The bloom of Lebanon withers. The mountains quake before him. The hills, they melt. The earth heaves before him, and the world and all who dwells in it. Who can stand before his indignation? So there's this picture that God, you take that city of Nineveh that is just so grandeur, and you stand and you look at the walls and you see the chariot races, and you look inside and you see the rivers and the palm trees and all the life, and it's nothing. The dust of the earth is like clouds on the feet of God, and he's just bigger. And the message that God may have for you today is this, is that he is bigger, bigger, bigger than anything in your life. And I don't care what it is. It's not even close. Knowing that he's slow to anger, it's great news if you're the one that's offending him. It's the great news if you're the adversary. But by the way, if we're going to be really honest, and I try to be, it's not real good news for us. Because put yourself in the shoes of Israel. And they're watching the oppression. And they're watching the money. And they're watching the filth that takes place, and the arrogance and the hate and the murder. And you're telling them that God is slow to anger? And what I realized this week, catch this, is that God's timing of slow to anger and time for judgment is one that we will never and can never comprehend. And for you and me to even pretend that we can see what God might be doing. It's ridiculous. And it's all perspective. Because if it's us living like hell, then we go, well, God, you got to be patient. But if we're living like heaven, we look over and go, what about those guys? And the lesson that I have for me, and maybe you too, is that yes, God's bigger than your issues, but it's a dangerous thing to start playing God and wondering, why are they flourishing and why am I not? And I don't know the answer to that. And if I did know the answer, I wouldn't be able to understand it. Yeah, I look forward to someday knowing that in heaven. I really do. So if he's jealous, very possessive, he's slow to anger. So the other thing that he is he's peerless and perfect. And peerless as in P-E-E-R, like there is no other peer. There's no one that matches his glory. Chapter 1, verse 7, the Lord is good and a stronghold in the day of trouble. He knows those who take refuge in him. He knows those who take refuge in him. But with an overflowing flood, he will make complete end of his adversaries. And we will pursue his enemies into darkness. Now we've got this picture of God who says, listen, you can't control much. I know you feel like you wish you could. You really don't, but you can't anyway. But the one thing that you control, every one of you, every person in this room, we can control one thing all day, every day. We can take refuge. The Lord is good, a stronghold in the day of trouble, and he knows those who take refuge. And that's the part that I love. He knows it. And you're sitting quietly, maybe in a hospital room, maybe in your car before you go into the funeral home to make arrangements. Maybe you come out and you sit on the bench because they just let you go. You came home and your wife left you a note. Four words. I want a divorce. Your adult kids say, don't call me again. Your doctor says, stage 4. God says, I know those who take refuge in me. Wow. I just named 5 or 6 biggies. Because we live in such a broken world, I'm guessing that there's some that I missed, and you're thinking, Randy, you missed a biggie. Doesn't matter. I love the fact that he knows. Hey, how can I convince you? I mean, how can I say to you, he's worthy? Books? Seminar? Conference? Podcast? Counseling? What can I do? Simple question. What can I do to help you know that he's worthy of taking refuge in? In the middle of pain, in the middle of confusion, in the middle of trouble, in the middle of uncertainty, I want us to read together 2 Thessalonians chapter 3, verse 5. Every week, every day I get a YouVersion verse, and I always stop, and it's uncanny how often these verses apply to what's going on in my life. And in this situation, it applied well in the sermon. I'll read it first. It says, "May the Lord direct your hearts to the love of God and the steadfastness of Christ." The reason I want us to read that is Paul asked the same question, but he also had the same passion and desire. More than anything else, my desire is that you would trust God and take that step forward and say, I'm taking refuge in you. And according to Scripture, I know that you know it. But until told otherwise, that's my best bet. And that's what Paul's message is here to the folks in Thessalonica. So I want us to read it 3 times, and we're just going to keep going. And some of you are going to be louder and faster. Others of you are going to be softer and slower. It could be a total disaster. But more than anything else, I want it to go from here into our hearts. Let's read it. May the Lord direct your hearts to the love of God and the steadfastness of Christ. May the Lord direct your hearts to the love of God and to the steadfastness of Christ. One more. May the Lord direct your hearts to the love of God and to the steadfastness of Christ. It's all set. Nahum is setting the table. We have this city that is just decadent and hateful and murderous. We've got this little country, God's people, here in the corner being oppressed. In the next couple weeks, we're going to unfold and see what happens and see how God uses this setting to be glorified. Because my prayer at the end of this is that somehow that the Lord will direct our hearts to the love of God and the perfect steadfastness of his love. Pretty cool, huh? Pretty cool, huh? Amen. That's what I thought. God, thank you. Thank you for this picture. 2,600 years ago. And as we unfold this, we find that Israel was under so much more pressure even than the church today, way more. God, may we just learn and understand that you are worthy for us to place our trust in you, and that you can be our refuge, and that you know it. Would you, for those that are trusting for the first time, will you somehow, God, give them some indication in their lives that you do know it and you're seeing them? God, encourage them. If you want me to pray for you this week, just slip your hand up. Say, Randy, I need to trust him in ways that I've never trusted him. Yep. Thank you. Yep, got it. Yep. God, there's some in this room that are carrying burdens that are just way heavier than they want to be carrying. God, I pray they'll just dump them at your feet. And I pray that they'll find refuge in you. In Jesus' name, amen. We're honored every single Sunday that you come. We're honored that you make Arizona Hills a part of your week. And we pray for you during the week, and our prayer is that God would grow you into a strength and put you in a place where you can trust him like you've never trusted him before. So as you go in peace and go in his love, I also want to tell you thank you for those that support us financially. The summer was a little tough, and so we understand that. It's tough for all the businesses and everything else, but for those that stand by us, we want to tell you thank you for standing with us. And so we receive our offering a little different way as you walk out. If you want to participate, great. If you can't or don't want to, that's fine as well. But we want to make sure that you're available for that. I've got some friends over here, my good friends, who want to pray with you. If you've got something going on, the marshals want to pray for you. They don't want to counsel you. They don't want to give advice. They just want to pray for you. And sometimes that's all you need. Stop in and say hi to Jonathan and Angie. If they're my friend, you're your friend too, I guarantee it. Go in peace. Have a good day. Rest in the refuge of God.